Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining The Brain 101. My name is Matt Caton, and we've got a really great webinar planned for you today. This is our chance to introduce you to the Brain application. I'm really going to be covering just the basics on all the features that you need to know in order to get started using the Brain on your desktop. Now, throughout the demo today, I'll be sharing many different options for you so you can customize the Brain to make it work best for your environment, whether you want to have shortcuts or links to files or copies of files moved into your Brain, or the actual file itself completely moved in. Many differences like that I'll be sharing with you today so you can build your own digital brain, a brain that best reflects how you see your information. Now, throughout the demo today, I will have the question panel open. So if you do have a particular question, please feel free to write that into the GoToMeeting question panel. And at the end of the demo, I'll circle back and answer any additional questions that you may have. Let's go ahead then and get started. I've got 3 different brains that I'll be sharing with you today. The first brain is actually an example of a business brain. Now, I don't share my own personal business brain because I keep all of my information in that brain. Passwords, invoices, contracts, phone numbers, everything, it all goes into my brain. So I have one place to go to retrieve all of my digital information. So therefore, I share a sample business brain that's set up very much like my own business brain, and I can add and delete some content there. Now, additionally, I'll be opening my own personal interest brain, so a brain where I keep track of my own hobbies, activities with my family and friends. I'm happy to share that with you, and I realize that we may not share the same interests in life, but it's some of the features that I utilize in the brain that are really important to demonstrate. And then finally, the third brain that I'll be opening up is a new brain that I'll create from scratch just to show you and share with you how easy it is to get started with the application. So let's talk about just the basic layout of the application. Once you install the brain, you'll notice that on the left, we have what we call thoughts. And thoughts are the building blocks of the brain you create. So I can click on a thought in my brain and make that the active thought. Anytime I click on a thought in my brain, that becomes the active thought. To add new thoughts, there are many different ways to add content into the brain that you're creating. We've got many different import options. I just want to share that with you right up front. So if you've got an existing folder structure or a zipped up file of folders, or another mind map utility, or an outline in an Excel spreadsheet or Word document, many of those different file types can be imported. Those are some more advanced features. But of course, you can build a brain thought by thought from scratch just by clicking and dragging on a gate. So I've got my prospective clients. Let's say I'm entertaining a new client called Ski House. And I just simply type in the name of that new thought, create that thought. Anything connected to that client is going to be associated and located in that area of my brain. And again, when I click on that thought, that becomes the center active thought. Above the active thought, we have parent thoughts. So I can click back up through the structure of thoughts that I've created. Below the active thought, we've got child thoughts. So you can really think of that as a hierarchy. The active thought fits into its parent thoughts categories. And down below, we've got all of the subcategories of the active thought, so all of its child thoughts. Now, over on the left, we have what we call a jump thought. This is something that is related to the active thought, but doesn't necessarily fit into any type of hierarchical structure. So in this case, I've got all of my company clients. Down below, I've got different categories that they fall into: prospective clients, clients by industry, their service level. Are they gold, silver, or bronze service level client? But Fred Baxter, as you can see, he's the manager of all clients. So I have a jump thought over to Fred's thought. And at any time, if I need to look up some information about Fred, I can just click on his thought. And of course, over on the right, I've got his phone number, all his contact information, some notes on maybe different meetings and so forth that we've had. But he's very easily accessible from that client's thought. Now, I'll share this with you as well. At any time, I can change a thought relationships. It's quite often asked of us, when do I create something as a child thought versus a jump thought? And there's no right or wrong answer to that question. I can have Fred as a child thought down below. So I just click and drag. Now he's a child thought of clients. That makes him sound like one of our clients, which is not exactly the case. He certainly doesn't own all of the clients. He oversees that department, and he's the main contact to reach out to if we need to send out a mass email to all of our clients or share some information. How are we going to distribute this new pricing structure to all of our clients? Fred is the person I need to speak with. So therefore, I like to have him linked up as a jump thought over on the left. And you'll see when I open my own brain when I choose to create something or add something as a jump thought versus as a child thought. But again, it's really just how you perceive that relationship, that piece of information. And also, I'd like to point out that a thought, I'm going to click down here through my service level, gold service level clients. And here's one of my clients, Spectrum. Now, notice that Spectrum has multiple parent thoughts. This is where the brain really differentiates itself from a typical file and folder type of structure. If I had a client called Spectrum and I wasn't using the brain, of course, I would create a folder, and inside that folder would all be my invoices and contracts and active projects and documents and so forth, meeting notes, everything that has to do with that client would be in that folder. But where does that folder reside? Yes, I could create a folder called My Clients. Here's all my media and entertainment clients. There's Spectrum. But when I navigate to that Spectrum thought, I have no way of seeing the other categories that it falls into. And maybe I click down through one of those categories and I can't find my Spectrum information at some point in the future. And that's really the beauty of the brain, is the thought can be linked to multiple locations without duplicating the information. So Spectrum, whether I click down through media and entertainment, click down through communications, maybe I was clicking down through my org chart, looking for engineers and different projects they're working on in the IT department. There's Joe Smith. He is in charge of all engineering projects for my client Spectrum. So I can find it that way as well. And I'm reminded that Spectrum is a gold service level client. So they are entitled to an upper level of customer service. They get weekly status reports and service logs rather than monthly or annual. So I'm keeping better track of all the interactions and all of the contact that I have with this client, documenting that, and I'm reminded every time I come to this thought that they are a gold service level client. So just the visualization of those relationships adds additional context to all the information that I'm creating, context that I wouldn't be able to see in a typical file and folder type of structure. Also notice that in many cases, I actually have labels on the links themselves. So I know the relationship between two thoughts. Let's pick on our people here over on the left. Joe Smith is an engineer. So I know that he's working on all the programming and in charge of all the engineering going on with this client. There's Fred again. This is actually he is the account lead for this particular client, Spectrum. And here's Tanya. Tanya, as you can see, is an ex-employee of Spectrum. So typically not an important relationship, but from time to time, Tanya is a very, very valuable resource for us when we're working on our different projects with Spectrum, because she's got that extra insight. What type of projects does Spectrum really appreciate? Do they want something cutting edge and really trendy, or do they want an ad campaign for this new product we're putting together to be a little more traditional and buttoned up and business-like? So we can share a few different ideas, get her feedback to help us keep this particular customer happy. So it's very easy to label links between thoughts. You can simply click on the link, and notice anytime I click on a link, I'm highlighting just specifically that link between, in this case, one of the active projects all together now, and Spectrum. I can add notes on a link, or I can click on it again to open up the link properties and define the relationship between those two thoughts. So sometimes I'm defining relationships between people, between documents, or even between different activities or whatever the case may be. In this case, let's say I've completed everything that needs to be done with this project. I'm just going to label that this is completed. And I can even change the color. So there's a lot of customizations you can do if I really need to see that this is a completed project, or maybe I sort of want that to fade away. So I get a darker link there. That's completed. So I've got a darker link so it's not drawing attention to that link. And now I can move on to my current focus, the reach out active project. And then after that, the corporate portal development. So that's my next step. So I'm labeling the relationship between two thoughts. You'll also notice that many thoughts have documents associated with them. A thought in your brain can not only contain notes, each individual thought has its own notes, but documents can be attached as well. So these can be links to Word documents, internal documents, spreadsheets, video files, graphics, any type of digital content can be associated with the brain. It's very easy to bring in web links and URLs. And I'll share many of those different options with you a little bit later. But I just want to point out that anytime you click on an attachment to a thought, it's going to launch that attachment in its native application. So here I'm just getting started on this Word document. It's my next step that I'm going to work on. And this launches in Microsoft Word. Also, many of the documents can be previewed in the content window. So here on Spectrum, in addition to having notes, I also have some web attachments. And notice the web links actually load up right there in the content window. So I can continue on browsing through that website right there in the content window without leaving the Brain application. So web links, previewing. I'll preview a couple of other document types in the attachment area during the class today as well. Let's talk just a little bit more about navigating through the brain. You may have noticed whenever I click on a thought, that thought is added to my past thought list down below. These are quite simply the 200 most recently clicked on thoughts. And for this particular feature, you'll really find the value as your brain continues to age and evolve over time. So you accumulate a lot of data, and as you're navigating through your brain, from time to time, it sparks some interest. Oh, I need to get back to that thought that I was on earlier. I'll navigate back to prospective clients and go directly to that thought. So quite simply, the 200 most recently activated thoughts, and I use that quite often as I'm navigating through the brain. Rather than clicking through the thoughts, it's showing up in the past thought list. And it's also really great for linking two distant thoughts together. So let's say in charge of all of my prospective clients is Joe Smith. Now, he's an engineer, so I'll undo this link here in just a moment. But notice that I can link to existing thoughts as well. If there's a relationship between something in my past thought list and something currently on the screen, I can link those two thoughts. Or right-click on the link between two thoughts and select to unlink. So it's important to point that out. You can always go back and modify how your brain has been created. I always tell people I never want them to have any fear of putting content into your brain. Go ahead and put it in first. You can always come back later and rearrange how it's linked or where it's located or what's attached or associated with that thought in your brain. And also up above, I have a couple of pins. And a pin is just a really nice shortcut to a thought that you are frequenting. So let's say my boss has just assigned for me to be in charge of all my new prospective clients. Now I'm suddenly visiting this thought in my brain 10, 20, 100 times a day. So I'm going to right-click on prospective clients and select to create a pin. Just simply makes a nice little shortcut at the top of the screen. And if you find that you're no longer navigating to a particular area, let's say last week I was in charge of the network map. That's done. I am no longer working on this project. I don't want to delete the thought. I just right-click and remove the pin. I don't need that shortcut there in my list of available pins. And I change my pins out quite often, depending on whatever my focus is in the brain that I have open. Whatever the thoughts I'm visiting most frequently, I'll just throw up a couple of pins so I can always navigate to and activate those thoughts very, very quickly. So let's talk about one last component with navigation, and then we'll jump into my own personal brain, and that is the search. The brain has a very, very easy to use and fast acting, I like to say, search, because the brain actually utilizes, if you're on Windows, it's using your Windows desktop search. If you're on a Mac, it's using Spotlight. So as soon as you're typing in some content, whether it's in the notes or a new thought name, it's automatically being indexed and therefore searchable. So I can just search for the word power. And notice as I'm typing, the search updates. I'll type in the full word power. And first, I've got thoughts that contain the word power. I've got a lot of meetings that recently took place and a lot of documents as well. So down below, all of the thought names and links and events, you can see I've got notes and attachments. So rebuild tasks, there's a little picture of a note. That means in the notes is the word power. And anytime I go up and click on the search, it goes back to the most recent search that I performed. So I'm right back into power. I can also, this is a nice little trick, hold down the shift key and click to open a couple of different documents. If I'm really browsing around trying to find what I'm looking for, here's an attachment that contains the word power. I'll go back to one of my PowerPoints. Again, I'm just holding down the control key or excuse me, the shift key. That way the search doesn't go away. So I can really browse through large search results to find what I'm looking for, activate those thoughts. And when I find it, there it is in a PDF that is showing up in my in the content window. So let's go ahead now and jump into my own personal brain. So I'm going to click on the tab and launch my brain. Now, anytime you open up a brain, if I was launching this from scratch, I'll go ahead and do that. You'll notice that it always goes to the last activated thought. So if I click on the plus tab, I open up a list of all my available brains. And let's take a moment to talk about this. You can create as many different brains as you'd like. So topic-specific brains on a project that you're working on, or a book that you're writing, or an idea that you have, or one brain with all of your information. Once again, there's no right or wrong, and you can always go back later, merge two brains together, or go back to a very large, massive mega brain that you've created and copy sections of that brain into smaller topic-specific brains. Again, some more advanced features, but it's not difficult, and the options are there and available for you. So I'm jumping into my personal brain. This is the Lore Bloom brain. So once again, notice that it launches the last activated thought. The brain remembers what you were thinking about the last time you were in this brain, and it takes you to that area. So these are dimensions for potentially a camper that I'll be building with my family. And notice I'm just jotting down some notes over here in the notes section. We're going to talk about those more in just a bit, but this is all in the area of my woodworking. So I enjoy woodworking. You can see my brain theme is sort of 70s hi-fi with the wood grain and the interesting colors, very 70s colors in my brain. That's another point to bring up, is that you can modify the brains that you create to reflect your own personality and your projects that you're working on, or whatever the topic of that brain is. Very, very easy to customize as well. So let me take you to a thought in this brain. This is called the Kahalo 14. Now this is a wooden stand-up paddleboard that my sons and I are building together. Long, slow process, and we'll probably get back to it a little bit more next summer. But you can see over on the right that my checklist. So let's talk about the notes for just a moment. The notes are actually my favorite feature of the brain application. Every individual thought that you create in the brain has its own notes tab. So it's like an ongoing journal about whatever topic that is. Maybe it's a person, business colleague, an idea you have. In this case, it's a project, actual paddleboard that my kids and I are building. And I like using checklists in the notes as well. So anytime I click in the notes, notice it opens up the notes toolbar up above. So I can customize the notes. As you've seen, I've got a sort of 70s style note going on here. But at any time, I can add to this content. So let's say in phase 2, once again, the next thing I need to purchase is a new roof rack for car travel. So I can add a new note. When that particular task takes place, I can go ahead and check that off the list. I use these checklists quite often in different areas of my brain, and especially in my business brains for projects that I'm working on. And another feature that I really like, I don't really have the need for it here, but I just want to bring this to your attention, is the timestamp. This timestamp is also customizable in your brain preferences. So I've got it set up to say the day, month, date, year, and exact time, etc. So I timestamp all of the different conversations that I'm having in business. When tasks are complete, I'll timestamp those. Also, just when I'm ordering products and things of that nature in my personal brain, I'll timestamp when that was ordered so I can always go back and refer to it later. Now, this is my real brain, so I do want to delete this content. Just check that off the list. And the last component that I wanted to share with you in this brain is another feature that's used quite heavily, and that is bringing in web content into the brain that I create. Now, you saw earlier, I clicked on a thought that had a web page attached, and those web pages load up right there in the content window. So at any time, if I want to sort of minimize the brain and focus on this is a blog that someone wrote about building this particular type of stand-up paddleboard. So I can go through and browse their blog and even click on links. And that stays right here in the content window. If the web page is set up that way, sometimes people set their web pages up to pop things open in new windows, and the brain will obey those rules. So you'll get a new window popping up, and that will be your default browser. And of course, if I wanted to view this website in my default browser, I would just click on the little icon to do that. So it's going to launch, for me, that's Google Chrome. And there's the same website loading up. It looks exactly the same in Google Chrome. Now, the reason why I like bringing web content into my brain for archiving it there is because I, number one, have multiple different machines. And also, I'm using different browsers on those different machines. So using my browser bookmarks and favorites really doesn't make sense for me. I'm using different browsers. So in the past, before TheBrain came along, I was always bouncing around in different browsers, even then, long ago, looking for content that was stored in my favorites in Internet Explorer instead of Opera or whatever the other browsers I used at the time were. So a lot of different browsers, different machines, but also I like it stored in context. So this is all about building my woodworking area. In this case, it's all about watercraft. A lot of watercraft design, obviously you need marine grade plywood, and there's one particular area in here, epoxy. So I order a lot of different epoxies. I've got links to, and notice the URLs are, well, when I click on them, there are all these long convoluted URLs from time to time. Again, all of that information stored right there in my brain, and my information about watercraft epoxies is not saved in a long scrolling list along with information about Labrador retriever rescues or business projects that I'm working on, whatever the case may be. It's stored in context with the subject matter of that website. So it keeps everything neat and orderly without these long scrolling lists that I would, many people are used to using in their default browsers and their bookmarks and favorites. So another reason why I bring all of that content directly here into the brain. Okay, so let's go ahead and leave my 1970s brain and we'll start a new brain from scratch. I'm going to click on the plus sign and I'll just name this brain my name. And that creates a new single thought inside my brain. And notice that you've got a lot of different choices for brain themes. It's going to select a theme for you just to show you that that feature is there. I'm going to go with just the classic light blue background, so I just get a nice clean display. And let's go ahead and start adding some content. So when I create a new brain, it's just an individual thought in the center of the brain. From here, I can start importing. If that's important to me, I'm going to create thoughts one by one by clicking and dragging on the thought gate. So an area for all my personal information, and each thought has three small gates: the child gate, the parent gate, and the jump gate. So I can decide where I want that content attached. I also want to create another child thought for business. And under personal, of course, I'll have all my own personal interests, my family. And notice I can also use keyboard shortcuts. So I click on F6 without doing the drag and drop. Or I can even right click on the thought and select to create a child. So many different options for you on how to create child thoughts. So I'll create an area for my woodworking and an area for baseball. So another trick that I want to share with you, if you're just getting started with the brain, this one is really helpful. You can actually add individual thoughts at a single time with the semicolon. So in other words, if I go into friends and click and drag, I know all of my friends off the top of my head. So there's Brendan. But notice I'm separating them with a semicolon. So individual semicolons will create individual thoughts for you. So it's a really, really great time saver. And think about that also if you've got a parts list, if you're working on your business brain or maybe a customer list. If you can get that into a semicolon delineated list, you can create an individual thought for each individual customer in your brain very, very quickly. And let's also go ahead and start connecting existing thoughts to one another. So under baseball, I've got my own local league that I play with. I also keep track of Major League Baseball. So that's done for the season, but I keep track of stats, games that I go to, parks that I've been to, etc. Under local, I'm keeping track of the roster, who's playing on the different teams this year, where we're playing, equipment rentals, etc. But most importantly, I'm going to be in charge of the schedule. So there'll be a lot of information here as my brain continues to evolve. But for now, I'm going to start working on the schedule for my team, and helping me with the schedule this next season is going to be my friend Brendan. So I'm going to create a jump thought. Notice I clicked and dragged off of the jump gate in this case over to Brendan. And I'm just going to type in the letter B to show you that the brain is always going to help you avoid duplicate thought names. So there's all thoughts that I have so far that start with the letter B. There's a few of them already, but there's Brendan. I'll double click and create a link to that existing Brendan thought. In other words, I don't ever want to have two thoughts, in this case for Brendan, one under friends, one connected to baseball schedule. I might go to the wrong thought in the future looking for some notes or his contact information, or when he mentioned he's going to be out of town next season. So I'll be taking track of the schedule. So all of that information will be here in the notes. And I'll say out of town, out of town, July 2018. So just a quick note about that. So I know that's when I'll be helping or taking care of my baseball schedule. But I've got just a nice simple link there between schedules. So I know if I'm out of town this week, I'm not going to have time to send out the schedule. I'm going to click on Brendan's thought, give him a quick call, and have him take care of it. And the schedule thought itself will have that content. So let's add some content to this thought. In this scenario, the schedule doesn't exist yet. We're going to talk about drag and drop in just a moment, but let's talk about first creating new individual file attachments from scratch right here in the brain. I'm going to click on the plus tab, and I've got a list of available file types. If you don't see what you're looking for in this list, just click on the templates button and follow these on-screen instructions. There's a directory that will open up, and anything that you drag and drop into that directory will be available for you in the templates list. So I already see what I'm looking for. I'm going to use a Excel spreadsheet. So now I've got an Excel spreadsheet called schedule. That's the thought name. So that's now the file name. And we'll just say May, June, July, etc. So I'll start filling out my schedule. I'll save that. It doesn't ask me where I want to save it to. That file, that document that was just created is saved internally in my brain. So I can launch it in Excel, or I can preview it here in the brain. I'll just click on the preview button, and notice that it previews right there in the content window, just like the PDFs or web pages did in the previous brains that I had open. So let's also add a little more content. Brendan is not only helping me with the schedule, he's also part of my team. So I'm going to click and drag and create a new parent for my team. Team will be linked to business. Oops. And I didn't select the existing one. So I'm going to actually right click and forget that thought. Typed it in so fast. There it is, business. So I'm going to link that to the existing business thought. So now Brendan falls into many different categories in my brain already. He's not only a good friend of mine, but he's also linked to helping me with the baseball schedule. And if I'm going down into business, looking at team, there's Brendan. I can also link team to my thought for Harlan. So any existing thoughts, any content that I already have can easily be linked right into different areas or new areas of the brain. And let's go ahead and start creating under business an area for my clients. And this is where we'll start dragging in some existing content. So let's say I've got 2 clients so far. I like the name Spectrum. And we'll say A to Z. So 2 new clients that I am working with. And if I think about this ahead of time, I'm going to have a lot of content under each one of these client thoughts. Meeting notes, contracts, invoices, presentations that I'll be giving, documents, research, all going into each individual client. Now, so that means in the future, I could have dozens or even thousands of thoughts underneath Spectrum. So I want to actually categorize that a little bit and cluster those different groups together of child thoughts. So in other words, I want to create an area for all of my presentations that I'm using for my client Spectrum. But A to Z will have their presentations as well. So I don't want to have multiple thoughts in my brain if I've got dozens of clients and they each have a presentations thought. I don't want dozens of thoughts in my brain just called presentations. So what I'm going to do is use the comma trick. So first I'll just add it. I add a comma to the thought and say presentations. Presentations. And what the comma does for me is it actually appends the parent name to the full thought name that you've just created. So this isn't just presentations, these are Spectrum presentations. And I spelled that wrong, Spec-T. And this is interesting too. I add the T and the brain sees that I'm using the comma trick, so it actually asks me if I want to rename the thought in other areas of the brain, which I do. That's a great time saver. If I've got dozens of commas being used on different thoughts down below, which I will in just a moment, that being able to spell check that and change the name, or even change the name of the client to something else, having the brain rename those thoughts for me is a really, really great time saver. And over under A to Z, my other client, once again, I'll use the comma. You can put the comma at the beginning, at the end, whatever works best for you. And so there's my A to Z presentation. So the payoff is already starting to be seen down below in the past thought list. Instead of just having 2 thoughts, both called presentations, there's A to Z, and there's my Spectrum presentations. I know which thought is the content that I'm looking for, and that'll pay off also if I ever run a report. The reports are an alphabetical listing of all the thoughts in the brain that could be filtered with a couple of different settings. But they're, once again, my Spectrum presentations and my A to Z presentations, rather than just having the word presentations show up many times. So I only use that comma trick when I've got a commonly named thought or a commonly used thought name. So also with my clients under A to Z, I'll have an area for my research and an area for my, I like to call them my spec sheets or life cycle documents. And notice I can add the comma at the beginning or at the end. I can also, if I leave the comma off, so I think I got it on research, there on presentations. Under spec sheets, I didn't add the comma. So if you're just learning about the comma trick or you forget when you're creating a thought, you can just manually add that content in. A to Z, comma. It won't add the parent name for you after the thought has already been created. So just manually enter that content and it's automatically updated. And once again, I can go back at any time if I want some spacing in there. The brain will realize I'm affecting all of the connected thoughts and make those changes for me. So let's go ahead and start dragging and dropping some content in. I've got some content right here on my desktop. My website budget, that specifically has to do with this client. So I'm gonna drag and drop that document in. And this creates a new, in this case, a child thought underneath the current active thought. You can also drag and hover over an existing thought to drop it there. But I dropped it beneath. That created a new child thought with the file name as the thought name and an internal attachment. I actually copied the website budget and brought that, a copy of that document internally into the brain. That's the default for dragging and dropping into the brain, is to make those copies. But of course, you can change that to best fit your environment. If you only want to make shortcuts to files, you don't want to move anything internally in, or you want to move everything internally into your brain so that you can sync it and access it from the cloud and other machines, those choices are yours, and you can go into options and then preferences. On a Mac, you'd click on the brain and then preferences. And on the UI tab, you can select to move files into the brain when you drag and drop, copy, or link, whatever works best for you. On top of this, there are keystrokes that you can follow to just override. So if you're typically copying files into the brain, but then someday something comes along, you want to create a shortcut, I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I'm on a Windows machine, so Alt, drag and drop, will override that setting, and it creates a shortcut. So here, my letterhead document, as you can see, there's a little black arrow icon there. And also, if I look at the details of this file attachment over on the right, I can see where it actually resides, versus an internal attachment really tells me that that's actually internal. And finally, you can always go back and modify. So you move some things into your brain that were supposed to be left out on your Z drive or X drive, whatever the case may be. I can right-click on the attachment and select to move a file out of the brain or copy a file out of the brain on an internal attachment. And on a shortcut, same process, I right-click and I can move that file into the brain. So let's go ahead and move that letterhead internally into the brain. And notice it no longer resides on my desktop. I've moved that file internally into the brain. So once again, your choice, whatever works best for your environment. But I will point out, internal attachments are being indexed and are therefore searchable. So I can search for content, and if it's inside that document in an internal attachment, that'll show up in your search results in the brain. Also, if you're syncing your brain to the cloud, to app.thebrain.com for online access or syncing between machines or syncing to a mobile device, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the demo today as well. Internal attachments go wherever the brain goes. When I sync to the cloud, I'm syncing these internal attachments up to app.thebrain.com. And I can access them from the web or from other machines that I sync to. So let's go ahead, and we've also created documents from scratch. You saw that I did that earlier with my spreadsheet for my baseball schedule. Let's also bring in some web content. You saw the brain that I had earlier with all of my favorite web pages. That particular brain is probably 90% web links. It's a very web-heavy brain. I live on the web. I bring a lot of web content into the brains that I create, and I've got some existing web pages open that I want to share with my clients. And there's different aspects of these different web pages that I like. So here in my brain for research for my A to Z clients, I'm researching their, first thing is their new website. And this particular website, I just really like the fonts. A lot of very fun, interesting, very friendly fonts. So I'm going to drag and drop that right into the brain. Creates a new website once again. The name of the website is whatever is showing up here in the tab on my browser. But again, it opens up in the content window. I can go back and rename that. some coffee website. I don't really need to know specifically the name. I just know it's a website about coffee. And I'm going to add a label. Great font variety or selection. I'll just say great fonts. And the reason why I changed the label is so that I can mouse over a thought, and the label is what's going to appear. I'm going to have a lot of different websites under here that I like for different reasons. So here's Travel Europe, has a lot of big, bold graphics that I really like. My client might like that as well. That's a great example of, I'll open up the thought properties display, bold graphics. And then finally, one more website, I'll drag and drop again. And notice when I'm doing my drag and drop, I'm clicking in the address bar of my browser. So it works from all the major browsers, IE, Chrome, Firefox, Safari if you're on a Mac. Just click and drag right into TheBrain to bring a link to that specific website. So this website also, let's go back and have it just linked as a child thought, and I'll show you. I can Alt and right click on that thought, or Alt and left click rather, and that opens up the thought property display on a non-active thought. So there's that Stripe website, and it's got smooth animation, or we'll just say smooth moving home page. Something that I'm going to remember in the future of how to describe that. So now when I'm sitting down with my client, I don't have to launch every individual website to see what it is I liked about it. Was it the color palette? Was it the animation? Was it the graphics, the font, the purchase page? I can simply hover over. This site had the smooth moving home page. So I click to activate it. That's what the first thing that I want to share with them. And they really like it and say, hey, let's do that for our website as well. Then I can jump over into the notes. With moving. So a couple of notes on how we want to change it to best fit our client. And collect all that information right there in that area of the brain on notes of different web pages that they like that we can recreate for them. So once again, I really love those thought labels. You may have noticed in my brain, whenever I'd mouse over a thought, sometimes a little label would pop up. So sometimes the brain will add those on their own if you're dragging and dropping from a website. If it picks up additional metadata, it drops that into the label if it thinks it's going to help you identify the content of that thought. But I like to modify that with my own information there. And once again, that information is searchable. Obviously, I could have left that on the notes, but then I have to actually click and activate that thought. You can also turn on a setting so when you hover over a thought, the notes load up for that thought you're hovering over. I typically turn that off, and I just like my labels to show up on thoughts in different areas of the brain. And finally, the last component that I wanted to share with you, I realize we're coming up on the hour, and again, just as a reminder, if you do have any questions about a feature that you really wanted to see today, please feel free to write that into the question panel. But the last component that I wanted to share with you, we talked a little bit about accessing your brain from the cloud, from the web. Everything that I've done here today is local on my local desktop. So anytime I log into this machine, I can open up these brains and access the information. But sometimes I want to take my brain with me on the road, or I want to access this brain from my laptop at home over the weekend. So the brain allows you to sync for cloud access. I can click on the sync button and just confirm that I'm uploading this brain. And the brain actually uploads to app.thebrain.com. So if you log into our website at thebrain.com, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a login button. I'm going to go ahead and log into app.thebrain. And these are all of my local brains that I've synced. Some I've created from scratch here on app.thebrain.com, but notice I've got access to my Laura Bloom brain there. All the different brains that I've created, I always sync those to the cloud for online access. And did I sync this brain? Yeah, it's syncing right now. So it's just syncing in the background. As soon as that brain becomes available, I can open it from the cloud. Here's eSolutions. This is the first brain that I had open today. And so I can launch this brain. And once again, anything that I've created. So if I go down into clients and prospective clients, I didn't sync after I added that new client, but all of that information is accessible online. So I can go down into Spectrum and once again, access all of those documents will load up. Here's the acme.com website. So I can launch this in the content window or go into any one of those active projects that I'm working on to launch that information for online access. This is all right here in my web browser. Now that I've synced it to the cloud, I can also download it from other machines. When I log in and I get a list of my available brains, notice that some of the brains have these little sync buttons there. That's telling me that's being synced to the cloud. Other brains are local only. So I see a little picture of a computer. That's telling me that this children's books brain is just local. And other brains, I'll have a little picture of a cloud from time to time, telling me that brain, there's a brain called new. I created that out on the cloud. It's only available online. Or I created it from another machine, synced it to the cloud. I have yet to download it onto this machine that I'm working on today. So very easy to access these brains that I create from multiple locations, access them from the web, or even access them from my mobile device. So let's see if I can bring up, make sure my camera is still on. I'm going to log in to my phone. And there actually I have a brain open. My Canoe brain is open. So just as I can navigate through the brain on the desktop or from my browser, I can do that from my mobile devices as well. Down below, you'll see there's icons, if I can get it to display, icons here for syncing if I make changes. This is actually a local copy. This brain is local on my device. So I can add some content. I can work on it while I'm offline and then sync back to the cloud. So it shows up online and on other devices. And at any time, I can add new content or new notes. So there I tapped on notes. So I can add a note for this thought. Tap again, that'll open up my keyboard. Add new content right from my mobile devices. This is really, really great for you travelers out there. I'm working on my brain while I'm in the airport, while I'm on the plane and in airplane mode. I can get a little bit of work done. And then once I'm back online, I just sync it to the cloud and I've retained all of that information, all of that data. So that's everything that I wanted to cover today. And I don't see any questions come into the question panel. So I will share with you that all of the information that I've covered today, I realized I went over a lot of information to get you introduced to the application, but you can always join us in the future at another Brain 101 at any time if you feel you need a refresher course or just want to catch up once again on how the basics work in the Brain application. We also have some very helpful resources available on our website at www.thebrain.com. You can go to the tutorials page to specifically watch a tutorial on a certain feature that you want to know more about. We've got some great tutorials available for you. And finally, we also have support@thebrain.com. Send a note in to support@thebrain.com, any type of question. And it doesn't matter if you're a free user of the Brain or a pro user or Team Brain subscriber where you're collaborating multiple people on the same brain. Support is free. We're happy to hear what you have to say and answer any questions that you may have. So feel free to contact us there. And Peter, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, everyone. It's always a pleasure to introduce people to the Brain for the first time. Again, we're happy to hear from you. Again, at support@thebrain.com. Have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, enjoy your brain. Thanks, everyone.